All right, we're going to give it another try. I hit the record button.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're here for the Post-Secondary Transition Podcast, where we like to have conversations around the ins and outs and everything in between of the transition process for families of students with disabilities. I am one of the hosts. My name is Megan Smallwood, and I am a public school transition coordinator. And who is my co-host?
And I'm Patrick Cadigan. I'm a public school special education teacher. And before we begin our conversation, we do like to give our listeners a definition of what we're talking about. So when we are discussing post-secondary transition, it really focuses between ages 14 and 21 and really helps answer that question of what do you want for your child after they leave school? We're looking to help answer that question by asking parents to think long-term, milestones, the milestones ahead of you, the research, resources, the goals you have.
And how do we define long-term? Well, what do you want your child to be doing after the school bus stops coming? Which is different for everybody, and it's a completely individualized experience. But along with that individuality can come some loneliness. In some cases, it can be a sense of isolation for families, and it's just a really unique experience. But there are other families who are going through the process, probably at the same time you are.
And along that journey, there's milestones that you need to focus on. Some of those are built around timeframes. Others can be at your own time frame when you're comfortable and you're ready. But using your child's school experiences will really help while doing the research. Using the resources at your disposal, such as a school transition specialist or other teachers, that's imperative. It is a lot of information. There's lots to consider, and in many cases, the answers will not always immediately present themselves. There might be some give and take. And there will be things that you do that may not have the desired outcome. Trying to do it all at once, though, can feel really consuming. So we're here hoping to help clear away some of that fog. All right. So for this week, we're going to swing back around and do another interview. For this week, we're going to interview Betsy Dooley, who is a former transition coordinator, but I'm going to go ahead and let Megan set this up.
Tonight, I have the honor of introducing Betsy Dooley, who is a former transition coordinator, recently retired. We are very happy to have you, Betsy, to share some information.
Well, thank you very much, Megan and Patrick. I'm very happy to be here. And thanks for having me on your podcast, which I have listened to, and it is really, really good. And it's helpful for families. So I appreciate that you guys are.
I would say then that that's a good place to start. Why don't, just to give the listeners a little bit of background about you, tell us about who you are and what you did.
Okay. Well, my career started on a little different path. My first graduate degree is in criminal justice and in the administration of justice. And I spent 3 years in a work release facility working there, and then 7 years in a local correctional facility in the state of Maryland. And I started there as a treatment coordinator who handled addiction services, counseling, mental health counseling. I ran the disciplinary team. And then I moved into the administration, which is, staffing, facility, anything that goes wrong. Do you have enough people there? What are the situations going down? Are the staff trained, et cetera? So,
that prepares you for life in school.
Well, an institution is an institution. And when you work in a correctional institution or an educational institution, you're still entrusted to care for those people and provide for their well-being and, consider their welfare. So, it really was good training on some levels before going to high school. And then I took some time off. I have quite a few children, took some time off, and at the end of my career in criminal justice, they had asked me to teach at the Police and Correctional Training Academy. I loved it. And from there, I started teaching criminal justice and juvenile delinquency and sociology at a couple of local community colleges, which I did part-time for 6 years. And then I jumped into the public school. I personally had a couple of children with IEPs. And when I saw the job come up, the first thing that I was asked is, did I know the paperwork? And I did know the paperwork inside and out. So I was hired and I went back to school while I was working, and I was provisionally certified, went back to school and got 48 additional credits in special education. And here I am. So I've been in the classroom 12 years, and then I was an ITL at my high school, and then I was in transition as that position, as it has expanded over the last few years greatly.
Yes, it has. You have quite the background, Betsy. I always love hearing about it.
Yeah, I like to do career days.
Well, and as somebody who's relatively new to this whole thing, and I always kind of argue out that I am the surrogate for the families, how has it changed? Like when you talk about how it expands, what do you mean by that it's expanded?
Well, 20 years ago, IEPs didn't really include transition. I mean, we were very focused on getting students through school and getting the credits they needed and moving on. As time has passed, we really give a lot of time and attention now to where is this student going? What are his goals and objectives? What does he want for himself or herself? And how do we help them get there? We have the transition coordinator really has the ability to help support the families, particularly those, certificate bound. They have so many things to think about. And diploma bound students, we really need to look ahead with them and say, if you're going to go to college and you currently have an IEP, what do you know your IEP? Do you know what's in your IEP? Do you know what your accommodations are? What makes you successful in the classroom? It's not just me that needs to know that, it's the student. So educating them about their IEP and then just working from where do you want to go? I always thought that as a transition coordinator and having sat in the seat of ITL or team leader, that transition meeting for a student moving from middle to high school, that's the conversation. That's the beginning of that conversation that the transition teacher should be in. Mm-hmm. Because those kids are starting to think ahead, and here's the classes, here's what we offer, here are opportunities, what do you think you want to do? And then the process begins. And it can go from, soup to nuts. There are things in the community that we can refer students to and help them with. And there are things in the school system. And, I would tell you, I've learned as much from the kids as I hope they have from me over the years, because transition is a real process, and it can look very different for every single kid.
And it's ever changing too for each kid.
Ever changing. Yeah. You really need, as a transition teacher, you really need to get to know the kids the best you can so that you can help them develop their strengths and interests. And some students don't even know how great they are, what their strengths are. For instance, being bilingual. Some kids are like, well, yeah, I do speak another language. Like, do you recognize what a great skill that is to be able to do that? A, in your head, B, out in a workplace or even in school. I mean, I think it really helps to draw attention to a lot of their, things they don't even know traits, characteristics, strengths they have, they don't even recognize.
When you talk about educating the students about their own IEP, what was something that surprised you about the process of that?
Well, as younger students move towards high school, in high school, we want those students at all of their IEP meetings. We want them to know what's in their IEP. When you're a young student, your parents go in, or your family guardian, and they write the IEP and they talk about the services. By the time those students get to high school, it's really important for them to know themselves and what they need. And why did we give you that accommodation? Do you need it? Do you use it? It's really important to include the student in those IEP conversations.
It's so surprising to me how many students, first of all, there's a couple that I've met that don't even know they have an IEP, which is kind of parent-led. They didn't want the child to know that they were different, which that's a whole nother conversation. But it always surprises me when I sit with a student and they don't know their accommodations. So that I think has been something, and I know Betsy, you were big on this too, like just making sure from freshman year, what are your accommodations? What do you use the most? Think about how you can make sure you're getting those and advocate for yourself, because that's what you're going to need moving forward.
And then Betsy, one question that I have is that by and large, were the students interested in learning about their IEP, or was it something that they just weren't, that was not their focus? That was not something that they were interested in?
Might be a little combination of they weren't as interested and they didn't have a need to know. And as they go through high school, they have a need to know, particularly diploma-bound students who are headed off to colleges or to jobs, and how do those accommodations translate into the workforce, and how are you going to secure those accommodations when you get to college? That is when the conversation becomes really important for them, because, and I tell all the students, particularly my students that are juniors moving into seniors, when you go to college, they aren't going to say, hi, Mom, can you tell us about, Joey's disability? Because that's not how it goes. That student has to be able to articulate and advocate for themselves. And that's why it's such an important conversation for them to know what was in their IEP, what was it for, and how is it going to translate when they get older. It's the accommodations in particular that are most important. Mm-hmm. There's no specialized instruction in college, but there is the use of your accommodations, and there are, there's disability support services. That's a huge piece of what we do later in the transition discussion throughout high school. The first, most important, I really do think, I would love to see transition coordinators go to the 8th grade IEP transition meetings and start talking to those students early, and then get to know them. I spent a lot of time in tutorial classes where you can really converse with the kids. And if you think we give them these transition assessments every year and do transition activities with them. If one assessment didn't work for a student, we had a toolbox full of them that we could use. I might use one that wasn't as common, but it might give me more information. I think the whole point of helping a student in transition is for them to understand themselves, recognize their skills, recognize their interests, and then see how those can be married, because there are so many jobs out there and there's so many different career paths. The most meaningful part of the job to me was being able to say, have you ever thought about this job? Have you ever thought about that job? Have you thought about how useful your skills are in, whatever the occupation they might be interested in? You do have your share of students that say, hey, I think I want to be a professional athlete. And you're like, well, okay, but let's think about plan B, because
let's have a backup plan just in case.
Have a backup just in case. Yeah. Or some of the students that they struggle with their academics. And then you're like, okay, we are between needing interventions for reading, for math, for, helping them in a tutorial class, and yet still trying to steer them and give them opportunities. There's not always time for all the classes they need and the opportunities we want to provide, et cetera.
I think that one of the things that's always interested me is, especially as I've gotten into transition and tried to understand it, is that I recognize very early on that a lot of the conversations that I hear about are very focused on college. But I kind of like what you were saying earlier. This was not something that I've always been doing. I came from the construction field, and the company that I worked for, the owner, it was my best friend actually, he always advocated that for the students for the trades, right? To electricians and plumbers and bricklayers. And he would always say that it's tough work. It's hard work. It's backbreaking work in some cases. But if you get good at it, you're going to do well. And I just don't feel like the focus. I think that there's such a focus on college that sometimes that gets left out of the conversation.
And one of the things I've always done is sat with every student in special ed and talk to them about their schedules. They have to select their classes every year in January, and I start that conversation in December and start talking to the juniors, the sophomores, and the freshmen. Hey, what are you going to take next year? What are you thinking? Or I'll have that conversation with them about what do you want to do when you grow up, so to speak. And I'll start saying to them, hey, you might want to think about taking anatomy and physiology as a senior, or did you know we have this academy for construction? Those kinds of things. One of the hardships for the kids, particularly those that might be interested in some of the trades or the ARL academies, which are phenomenal, is it is 2 classes as a junior and 3 classes as a senior. And I find some of the students really have trouble because they don't have 5 extra spaces in their schedule for that. I mean, yes, they might be able to avoid 2 years of foreign language, but if they want an academy and they want to be as ready as they can be for college, there's a number of considerations for the classes they want to make sure they have on their transcripts. And then you have to have a really good relationship with families in order to say, what do you think about a 5-year high school career or longer? Because that's not always a welcome conversation.
That can be a very tough conversation because everyone has it in their head. They need to fit into that cookie cutter 4 years. Otherwise, you're looked at, I hate to say it, but like almost a failure. And it's not true at all. But I think, we're so driven to get it done and move on to the next step of our life.
And there are some students for whom they just need the extra year.
Absolutely.
To fail, they can't get through a math class
But it's the same thing with college. There's some people who just, if you need that scheduling to take just a couple classes each semester, you do it at your own pace. So I feel like, high school is the same thing. If you need to just take less classes one semester, or I know at our school, they'll try to match one of the more difficult classes with an easier class so that they're not so boggled down by both. So you're right. It does take a lot of collaboration with the parents, with the other team members of the school, but it's possible.
Yes. And with their guidance counselors, it really does take a lot of collaboration. And sometimes, and I tell kids this particularly because I'm old enough to be their grandmother, but I say to them, time is a gift. If 5 years of high school can offer you an opportunity that you may not be able to go out and get on your own elsewhere, you really need to think about, and the students for whom the additional reading, writing, math support is necessary, take those while you can. Time is a gift. You don't have to be out of high school in 4 years. And if you're really set on it, then take some summer school classes. You do just have to be very collaborative with the student, with the family, and
I think it's okay to have that conversation from day one. I mean, it doesn't hurt just to throw it out there for all of them so that everyone can start wrapping their head around it. But.
Very true. And the assessments that we do with the students for transition, they're really helpful. And I think in our transition pages, we summarize those, particularly when we find something that, really, really represents who the student is. And maybe the student doesn't see that in themselves, but we see that in them. And we say, you know what, we're gonna summarize this. My transition pages, I know I tried to tell a story. So I left in there grade 9, grade 10, grade 11. So there was if anybody read anything in the IEP that they would be able to know, oh, this is where the student started and what they thought they wanted.
And it's fun too. I like telling the student that,
Yes.
when they reach senior year, I'll be like, all 4 years you told me the same thing that hasn't changed. Or especially the ones who maybe freshman year, they wanted to be a video game designer. And now here we are senior year and they've decided on a whole different thing.
Yes.
It's fun to see how they developed and come into their own.
Yes, very true. And that's the first thing I say to them. What did you tell me you wanted to do last year? And they say, I don't know. What did I say? And you tell them, they're like, oh, no.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking.
Or you're right. Some students come in and they say, this is what I love this. This is what I want to do.
Yeah.
And then you can really, zero in. You need to take this class. Think of this opportunity. Do this, do that. Just, it's really, really rewarding to have a conversation with a student who starts to see in themselves what we see as strengths.
Yeah.
That's when you're like, oh, this was great. It's one of the best things, any conversation you can have with a kid.
And that was kind of my next question about what you were most passionate about when you were working with the students on the diploma track.
Yeah, for any student, diploma or certificate, is for them to know themselves and appreciate their strengths. Mm-hmm. All of those kids have something to offer, and they just, I call them kids, but all those students, so many of them have wonderful personal characteristics, and even though they say, I don't have a clue what I want to do, but this student has great people skills or is really good with numbers or problem solving. And you just say, here's jobs where many of the people that are super successful in this career field have skills just like you. Mm-hmm. You already have skills that are, employable. And even if it's just, hey, you didn't know you wanted sales, but you have this great ability to connect with other people. And, there's one student I can think of, just the greatest. I loved this young man. And I finally said to him one day, I think you could sell ice to an Eskimo. And it was just the funniest conversation because he was like, what? But it's that conversation. That is the most rewarding part of transition, is when the student starts to understand the skills and their inner strengths that they have.
And it's so important because I feel like, the ones that are struggling the most too, they're just so beaten down with, my grades are terrible. I can't do this. I'm behind on this. So to have those kinds of conversations about, well, you're good at this. Mm-hmm. This is what, your future could be. Let's talk about some exciting things. It's just a little bit more motivating for them.
Yes. And you never want to squash a dream, but, I try and tell kids, well, think on there are other things you can do. If you want to be a doctor and you don't want to do 12 years of preparation, there's other ways to include medicine in what you want to do. And just think those conversations, those are super meaningful, and it's great when you can see the light bulb. Getting to know the kids and getting to know the families is the biggest benefit.
I was going to ask, what did you enjoy getting to work with the families a lot and building those relationships with them? Because I know I like that part of the job.
Yeah, I like that part of the job too. And I think you are never, that is also a process, and you're never too early to start that. We should be reaching out in grade 8 and saying, hey, this is who I am, and this is why you're going to see me every year in high school, and this is what we're going to talk about, and this is what I'm here to help you with.
That was one thing you said before too that I wanted to highlight, because I know I was just talking with a couple of the other transition coordinators the other day about this, because we were talking about sessions or meetings to have for parents moving forward. And that meeting came up about grade 8. And I know a lot of times when they're coming into high school, the thought is more directed towards the transition to high school and how are they going to fit in, and we have to worry about this, and they don't want to necessarily talk about the future. But I feel like it's a perfect opportunity as a transition coordinator to kind of fit yourself in there and let them know that you're here on their side, and just kind of start mentioning like clubs, activities, things that align with school, but really you're trying to help them find their interests and their, what they like. But then your name kind of sticks in the parents and the student's mind, and then you build that relationship. So as they get older, they realize that you are that support that they really could lean on for, more things.
Absolutely. And students, I tell all the students I'm here when I was at school, I was there all the time, and they could come and literally ask me anything. I don't know what to do about, my homework. I'm falling behind. Where do I get extra help? How do I do this? How do I make an appointment with my guidance counselor? Whatever the question was, I would tell them, just seek someone out, or seek me out, find me. Here's my office. Come anytime, no matter what the question is, you can ask it. And I think that's just part of building the relationship with the students, so they were comfortable. But, it's just another opportunity. I would hope if a student went to guidance and asked a question, they'd say, you might want to reach out to your transition coordinator and ask for help with that particular apprenticeship or something. I do think our apprenticeships are great for our students. And many of the students for which they are the best fit, that might be a 5-year conversation. Because it is a time-consuming thing. They need to be older because they need their own transportation. So they need to have a license, many of them, for that. So that is not a typical conversation. That's a little bit, you really have to include the family, and you have to plan for that.
But if it's a field that they're super passionate about, and knowing that they can get in with an employer who's basically going to train them to hire them, I think it's definitely a worthwhile conversation. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of great opportunities, and it's just a matter of making sure that all the students know that. What are some of the challenging aspects of the job that you had to deal with?
I think one of the challenging things is you can't stress often enough that transition is a process, and it is never too early to start the process. There's a lot of factors that go into it. There's a lot of, what does the family want? What does the student want? What can the school help with? What community resources are there? It's kind of where do you blend all of that? And there have been a lot of changes over the years in what's offered out in the community, what help is out in the community, what the school resources are, what we do. So I think that was a challenge, just coordinating all of the services, and it's very timely. It's a timely process. So that's, you just got to keep on keeping on and tell them, just start this early. Another challenge is to work with students and try to help them set realistic goals for careers.
Yeah.
Even if that's the professional athlete. Okay, well, there might be 60 people on a professional football team, but there's only 12 on that NBA team. So you might have to, some very realistic goals. And okay, and you're going to go to college for sports. That's great, but you also have to study something. What are you going to study? So just trying to create a picture of the world that they can understand, and I don't know.
Something a little more attainable.
Yeah, something attainable, something that's a little tangible for them.
Yeah.
That was always a little bit more of a challenge. And some students, I would think, okay, you can have that goal, but we're gonna work on your one skill we do know that you have. That's a great skill. So we're hoping we do that with kids. I also think I personally would like to see more opportunities for students who may not be headed to college, but want or don't think they want to go to college, but they really do want to work and they aren't sure where to start. And I think it would be helpful if they could we could introduce them to the world of work, and not just through work study, which isn't even, open to every student. I just would like to see more work opportunities.
That's a great point, because I feel like we have preparation for college, obviously, preparation for some of the trade schools, but there's really no preparation for just employment, competitive employment for those students who that's what they want to do. So,
right.
Yeah,
I would agree. And it's a hard thing to do, because many times those are the same students that need all of their academics and interventions. And those are also really important. Again, time is a gift. So reading and writing and your math skills have to be a focus for as long as they can be. And that's why it's, it is hard to have the 5-year conversation, but I do think we have a lot to offer for students who are open to extending their high school careers.
I agree. Did you come across many situations where maybe the student's goal or career interest did not align with what the family's career or goal interest was?
Yes, absolutely. But ultimately, the student has to be the one that goes home every day to his family, and he has to have that conversation as well. And I think it was most important for me to help that student figure out, if this is what you want, how do you facilitate the conversation of, these are the goals I have in mind. I also tell students, people change their careers all the time. I think everybody I know did. That is just helping them to understand, why do you want that? And what does your family want? And do you understand why your family wants that? And then just facilitating either a conversation with the family, or helping the student to be able to address that.
Yeah, just another opportunity for them to advocate for themselves too.
Yeah, they really have to practice that. Starting at home is most important.
Right.
Because they have to advocate for themselves the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So, and the better they are at it, the better it will be for them.
Yeah, it won't be as much of a shock when they leave us and move on to the next step of life.
I think another really great thing is just celebrating all their achievements. When kids do something that you've hoped for, or you've encouraged them to do, and they do it well, it's like, that is so awesome. I tried never to miss an opportunity to tell a kid or tell a student just how great they were, or what they had done was so impressive, or give them feedback, because that's really important. And it was just great that as a transition coordinator, you have the ability to see the students and be that person that gets a chance to talk to them. So.
Yeah, it's always fun to go to graduation and you have so many students walking across that stage that you were their cheerleader, along with the teams, but like it just it feels good.
Yeah, it does feel good. I'm really looking forward to graduation this year.
I think that's all of the questions, Patrick. Did you have any others?
Multiple other avenues that we could go down. This is a good setup, because we've never had we rarely have had the conversation around the diploma side of things. I will say that was one of the things that I was thinking about, was how do you deal with when a student has their idea of a trajectory, and then you have the family's idea of the trajectory, and they are either wildly different or just clearly not aligned. I don't even know if I would say avoiding that challenge, but just working with that challenge.
Yeah. It's definitely a work in progress.
Because we recently, there was a student who, through a mutual friend, the student had communicated an interest in broadcasting. And so we facilitated a conversation with the student, and I just, me thinking about it, I was like, okay, we're going to have to worry about this and this and this and this, and probably gave them a laundry list of things, not necessarily something that they had to do right away, but looking ahead, these are the things that, if this is something that you want to do, these are the things that you're going to, want to think about. And I remember, I think that the student was like, okay, yeah, I got it. That's great. And mom was like, ooh, we hadn't thought of that stuff. Okay. Well, thank you for letting us think about that. And again, the provocative conversations and how and when do you have them?
Well, and I think that goes into the whole researching and, really taking the time to dive into what you say is an area of interest, but is it really an area of interest, or are you just kind of throwing that out there because that's what you've heard or that's what you
Or you
are
think it's
familiar
super
with?
cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like game
but
design.
then exactly, but then you actually get into it and you're like, "Oh, I don't wanna do that." Or Betsy, like you said, "I don't wanna go to school for 12 years to be a doctor." Like, that's
Yeah.
crazy. I just wanna get out of
Yeah.
these 4 in high school. So,
Although I will say, and Betsy, as you were talking about it, I started to think about, having that conversation with the student and with the family. And as I'm thinking about it right now in the moment, I'm like, if we're looking at it as a process, what do we concentrate on first? And so maybe my approach to it was like, hey, think about this and this and this and this. Well, maybe not necessarily do that. Maybe take a step back and go, okay, well, what can we focus on now? Because the hardware side of things could be a lot of fun. Broadcasting and writing your own show and doing your own content, that's a different skill set. But like if you just like putting things together and knowing where to plug a microphone in and knowing where the record button is, I mean, that can be a valuable skill set.
It's a very valuable skill set, particularly if you're my age.
Oh God, I can hear myself teasing my mom now. Okay, Mom, this is the power button. Press it down. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's as transition is a huge process. You don't have to do one thing first and one thing second. It can be a culmination of many different conversations and many different meetings with a student that I really think the most important thing we can do for a student is to help them again see the strengths they have that come fairly naturally to them, that are things they enjoy, and how that might work into a job, and then all the jobs on the periphery of those interests, because some are equally as important and students might not think of those. So just exploration is really important, career exploration, and then getting to know themselves. I mean, in ninth grade, our typical theme was focus on the learner. What are your learning behaviors? What do you need the most help with, et cetera? And then it got into what are your
what do you like
career, what do you like to do? What are your career skills that you might have? And then how do they translate into the work world? And again, kids don't, I think many students don't see the value in their own personal traits sometimes. And it's huge when you go to work. Nobody wants to work with, people who can't communicate or, don't like other people, and then they get a people job. You know what I'm saying? There's ways to help them translate their skills into valuable, or their strengths into valuable skills.
I always find it fun when you meet with a kid who, I don't know what I want to do, and I'll start just quizzing them. Do you like working with people or a team, or you like working by yourself? Do you like working indoors? Do you like working outdoors? And you can see them stop and think like, I think I would like to work by myself. Like, it just makes them start realizing you do have certain interests that you may not have thought or wanted to admit, and we can kind of work towards what that would lead, in the employment field.
One of the other things, though, and again, you want to talk about having a provocative conversation. I think that one aspect of that, I think the reason why they don't necessarily go there is because the school system in general is very deficit focused. And they spend most of their time hearing about all of the things that they're not doing. So so when you kind of twist the conversation around and you're like, well, what do you like to do and what are you good at? It's almost like they don't even know where to start. Yeah. And that is, as a teacher, that is something that I have been thinking about lately. It is, it is something. I suppose if I could, if we could figure out figure out the solution for that one, that we'd all be making a heck of a lot more money than we are now.
Yeah.
That is true.
We'd be doing another podcast somewhere else.
But one of the things, though, Betsy, that you had said earlier that got me thinking in specific to after high school, and if the student has then decided to go on to college, and recognizing, and this is a conversation that Megan and I have had also, the difference between entitlement versus eligibility. By the time you get into college, you don't have an IEP. And so therefore, knowing yourself and knowing what your strengths are and what your limitations are in that regard. Because I have a cousin who went through high school, and they worked really hard with him, and he was doing really, really well. And then, he got to college, and that first semester was really, really hard, and it didn't go so well. And so they had to, kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, how do we come at this differently? But it's funny when I think of that, and I think of that college is a whole other world, a whole other conversation to have.
And I start that conversation with my second semester juniors and then seniors. And we do sit down with them and explain to them and give them paperwork that tells the difference between entitlement, entitlement and eligibility, and advocating for yourself and what to expect and how to get involved. That is a very important conversation for seniors.
And it's funny, some of the questions that come out, because as you've built that relationship with them, they do see you as that person that they can just ask anything. So I've gotten questions like, well, when can I take classes at night? Do I have to take them in the morning? Like, just understanding, because it's such a uncharted territory, and it's so different. And they've been so used to having the case manager there to check on everything, and the parents there to check on anything, and now it's just them. And it's scary. And that's why, I always tell the students too, and I know you did, Betsy, like, community college is a great thing. It's a great place to start with that transition, because you're going to have your world turned upside down with all of the changes. So why not start somewhere that in our community college offers a great amount of support through their disability support services and all the resources they have. And why not help yourself with all of that as you're starting this process? But yeah.
If anything, it's just giving them an opportunity to wade in, because that was what I did. I started at community college. I got 2 years out of the way, and then moved on to Towson. But that community college experience was fantastic, and
but they have to know what their rights are as a student when they leave high school and move on, and what their responsibilities are as well.
Yeah.
So. And it does change. I mean, when you have a team that advocates for you and goes to your teachers and these are your accommodations, then you get to college and you got to make that contact with your teacher. You have to seek out the help you need.
Yes.
It changes the scenario, and some students are better at it than others.
Yeah.
I will tell you, though, that I have had conversations with parents who have said that colleges also need to do a better job of kind of like letting the parents know what the college has to offer, more so along the lines of when it comes to working with people with disabilities, and, saying this is what we have, and this is what we do, and this is how we can help.
That's another awareness and changes in education that have happened tremendously over the last 15 to 20 years. What they offer in college for kids with disabilities, the services, the testing, that has changed significantly.
That's a question that's come up a lot lately from parents asking, well, what colleges are better equipped or work better with students with disabilities? And I know our guidance counselors provide some resources, or, there's lists out there that you can go through and start the research process. But honestly, just going in on your tours and seeing for yourself, make an appointment and talking with them.
Yeah. And then also, like, I would, that along those lines, thinking of like knowing what questions to ask and being able, and again, I think that goes back to the advocacy piece, knowing yourself well enough to say, well, this is a challenge that I have. How can you guys help?
And again, they have to be open to doing that. So I think it's just so important for the students to, by senior year, understand who they are as a learner, understand their disability and those accommodations.
And we have, the transition teachers have a list of questions that we provide. And I think Megan might have wrote the list of questions, written it some time ago. We give it to parents. If you're seeking an agency, an adult agency, here's some questions to sort of steer the conversation. And when you go to see that agency, what are you looking for? We could be doing that for students as they go to have that conversation with a college.
It's not a bad idea. I'll get on that.
There you go. What do you want to ask? What do you want to make sure they know about you? What do you want that school to know about you?
Well, and that's kind of like with the Maryland Summary of Performance that the seniors leave with. There is a student perspective, and that is one of the questions. What do you want them to know about yourself? And I always tell the students, this is the chance, and it's just practice for when you go to the support services office. This is your chance to write down what you want them to know about you. And I love seeing the responses too, because even the quietest students, they'll put down something like, I might take more time, but when I'm motivated, I will give my all, and I will do it, or I'm excited, whatever it may be. But it's just their chance to let them know, they're all in.
Yeah. And that's another good conversation, because sometimes you have to help the student figure out, what would you want them to know about you? How about you're really good at this? But
I have gotten a couple that said, nothing now. Nothing to share.
All right. And before we let you go this week for our That's Helpful resource, we wanted to share out the T21mom.com podcast. Now, Mary Cardle, whose daughter Ainsley rocks an extra chromosome, hosts informational discussions around those experiences, and the discussions are fantastic. Past conversations cover children who use spelling to communicate, a mother who couldn't find representation in children's books that mirrored her experiences, so she decided to just go out and write her own book series about her son, and interviews with clinicians that discuss a wide variety of relevant topics. We love this podcast, and we think that you will too. So go to any of your podcasting platforms and look up T21mom.com and give it a listen. It's really fantastic. All right, Megan, how are we going to close this one out?
We really, really encourage that you follow the information from this and our other conversations that we've had in our show notes. Make sure to follow, and please share out the podcast with anyone that you know who might be getting ready to go through the transition process, is in the midst of it, even has gone through it and just wants to, brush up on information or have anything to share with us. Check out our YouTube channel. We have videos of all our conversations, including doing some of the legwork for you by curating videos of topics that revolve around transition. We've created playlists that cover guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, ABLE accounts, and still more to come. So be sure to subscribe there as well. And of course, check out our website, which is chock full of information around the transition process. You'll find our contact information there. We love hearing from you all. So please go to www.postsecondarytransition.com.
We look forward to talking with you guys again.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.